Hi, Miss Bat here with today's class text. The book is called Riddle of the Runes. Take a guess what you think this book could be about. It's a few clues, well done. There's a Viking mystery, and the girl in the book is holding a staff, wearing some Viking clothes, and standing next to a wolf. Let's read the blurb. Alva rushes through the trees in the dead of night with her sniffer wolf Fem. Being out alone when there's a kidnapper on the loose is reckless, but if she ever wants to be an investigator like her uncle Magnus, she'll need to be the first on the crime scene. But what Alva discovers raises more questions than it answers, drawing into a dangerous search for truth and for treasure. What I'd like you to do is pause the video, and I'd like you to make a guess of what you think the book could be about. So I'd like you to predict what you think the book could be about, who the main characters are, and who the accomplice could be. So let's start the book. Before we start the book, actually, what I'd like you to do, a rune is the Viking alphabet. I'd like you to take note of these alphabets and what they mean, because this will come in handy in the rest of the book. Let's meet some of the characters. They're over there, and it's held in, the book is based in a place called Kilsgard. So use the Viking alphabet to unlock the hidden meaning behind the rune shown at the start of each chapter. So can you see a rune over here? That's right, it looks like the letter F. If you go back to your notes, see what that F stands for. In search of great treasure. Alva was running so fast the wind whistled in her ears and her braids, in her bright red hair lashed against her face. She was like a wolf. She was stealthy. She was strong, the tallest mountain in Kilsgard. Giant's finger rose ahead through the sunken mist, and to her left, sheer cliffs reached out over the angry black waters. Where do you think she is? And who do you think is Giant's finger? I'd like you to take a prediction and write it down. We'll find out. Of the river howling against the rocks below. She was faster than the water. She was faster than the wind. But one wrong step, and Alva would become water and wind. She must be sure in her feet. She must not fall. Sharp branches cut the skin on her bare legs as she smashed the forest floor beneath her shoes. No time for pain. Now she needed the wits of a shield maiden. She must see everything and be prepared for anything. Her pet wolf, Fenrir, kept dipping in and out of view ahead of her, his paws silent on the leaves and his silver fur flashing in and out of the moonlight. He had the scent. He was taking her where she needed to go. Where do you think she needed to go? Where are they? And why is the wolf running? Some good answers there. Well done. But as her leather soles leapt over the rock and branch, suddenly the forest reached over a knotted hand. Alva's foot caught against a root and time slowed. Tumbling, the edge of the cliff filled her vision. The roar of the river grew deafening. As her heart bashed hard against her ribcage, she could see black jaws of the river's mouth reaching towards her, and the giant's finger reared up dark over her head as she fell. Bang! 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 Alva sat upright on her straw mattress. What has just happened? Was it real life? She wasn't in the water. She was home. A film of sweat wrapped around her body like a shroud. The fire still gave off an orange glow, and she saw her family stirring, disturbed by a loud thud on the door. "Storsbones!" her uncle Magnus was shouting now. Her little brother Ivan gave a howl at having been roused from his sleep, and her mother, Brianna, pulled the grizzling child into an embrace to comfort him. "In the name of all gods, what do you want?" Magnus bellowed, swinging his wooden cloak over his bare shoulders. In the half-light, Alva could see the scars of old battles etched on his back. But she looked away quickly and squeezed up next to her mother, who wrapped her long, pale arms around her. "Magnus!" A deep voice called through the thick wooden door. "There's an epic saga playing out in the hall right now. Jarl Eric needs you. Says we need you." "What time is it?" Magnus replied, swinging open the door to reveal two carls armed with swords. "And why have you come to my home with iron in your fists?" "Forgive us, but there is danger in the air tonight. You will learn more when you get to the hall. We're in the small hours between night and morning." One of the men poked his bearded young face inside and saw Alva, Brianna, and Ivan huddled together at the far end. Our apologies for rousing you. We just need Magnus, but please, there is nothing to worry about. Go back to sleep. Alva, still reeling from her dream, bristled at the sight of the armoured men inside the safety of her home. She nuzzled closer to her mother and pulled the covers over her body. Catching the look of concern on the two men's faces, Magnus went to his boots and began pulling them onto his feet. I'll bring the bird. He may be useful. Lifting his tame raven, Graf, from his perch by the door, Magnus placed the blackbird gently on his shoulder. Graf ruffled his feathers and let out a sleepy caw. Alva felt a stab of jealousy towards the bird, and despite the cold and the darkness, she wished that she could join her uncle and discover what was happening in the Great Hall. It's not time for waking yet, her uncle said gently towards the back of the hut. You three must get some more sleep, because that rascal Ivan will be up wailing for breakfast before long. As if seeing her thoughts, he caught Alva's eye before adding, all of you need to go back to sleep. Then grumbling to the two Carls, he slammed the door behind him, and Alva heard his voice drifting away down the street. Magnus is right, Brianna said, giving her daughter a squeeze and laying her back down on the mattress. We must get some sleep. I need you to run some important errands for me tomorrow. Plus, we wouldn't have to keep this one busy. She gestured at the bundle of red hair that was on the top of Ivan's head. Alva's brother had already fallen back to sleep, and now Brianna curled herself around him. Calm fell over the family, and soon Brianna's quiet snores sank into a broken rhythm with Ivan's. But Alva was wide awake. Her nightmare had stayed imprinted on her memory, and her heart was still pattering much too fast on her chest. Had she seen her own death? Perhaps the gods were sending her a warning. She lay still, eyes closed in the darkness, visualized herself as a raven swooping over Kilsgard, peering into the hall, where she could see her uncle in conversation with Jarl. From the expressions on her faces, it was clear that the Carls brought news of danger and drama. Something serious was happening in Kilsgard, and her mind began turning over possible scenarios. Was the town under attack? Had something happened to the Jarl? Had there been an omen from the gods? She knew she shouldn't give in to her desire to know more, but Alva was desperate to hear the speeches in the hall tonight. What do you think Alva's going to do? Very interesting. Let's carry on, shall we? Her mother would be so angry if she awoke and found her daughter missing. But she had to take that risk. She had to follow Magnus. She had to investigate. After all, that's what she was, an investigator. She had eased herself up from the mattress. The straw inside crackled and creaked. Alva held her breath, but her mother and brother snored on, fetching her cloak from a hook. She wrapped it tightly around her and slid on her shoes. She moved silently across the room, carefully avoiding the floorboards. She knew she would make a sound and bent down to look under the table. Here, on a thick woolen blanket, her wolf, Fenrir, lay fast asleep. She pressed her face up close to his muzzle and whispered, "Fen." His eyelids snapped open, revealing two black pupils, outlined with sea blue rings. As Fenrir realized it was Alva, he rapidly began to bang his tail on the floor in excitement. Shh! She placing her hands on the wagging tail to muffle the sound. You're coming with me, silly wolf. Alva got to her feet and Fenrir followed, padding quietly across the rushes on the floor. The door made a loud whining noise as she heaved it open. Catching a breath, Alva turned back to see if anyone had noticed. Her brother was staring at her from underneath the curtain of her mother's auburn hair. Go back to sleep, Ivan, she whispered across the room. He held her gaze for a moment and then shut his eyes. With dread flowing through her veins like ice, Alva slid through the door. She found herself in a biting cold night, and Fenrir gave a small gruff snort to show that he was rather annoyed at being outside. Come on, Fen, she said, setting a quick pace in the direction of the hall. Only a silvery, pale glow of half moon lit the edges of the houses, but she knew the way without needing to see. Alva had lived in this town her whole life, and she knew every alley, every person, everything that happened within the halls of Kilsgard. She made it her business to know. A lost chicken or a broken fence, an argument over a payment or a secret message passed between lovers. She saw everything. Alva's hunger for investigating mysteries had been fed by her uncle. Magnus had travelled the world, growing in knowledge with each of his 40 winters. He knew so much about so many things and could pick apart information like a mouse unfurling a nut. But she knew more than him about one thing, Kilsgard, and all that happened in it. She could go unnoticed, hide behind hedges, and peer through cracks. She knew the people of the town inside out. So really, it was her business to know what was going on in the hall right now, wasn't it? This hall, this town, and these people were all Alva had ever known. And to her, they were perfect. Kilsgard had its own harbour, which could be filled up to 20 ships with the men were getting ready to go, a Viking. The huts of the villagers were comfortable and warm, even in the cruel winter months. The yards noisy with the calls of chickens, pigs, and sheep backed onto one another, so Alva could leap over the fences to reach the homes of her friends and disappear for adventures in the woods. An insatiable need for adventure would land her in trouble. Everyone said so. Everyone said the fates would not protect her forever. But the villagers were all asleep now, and the only flicker of light came from the great hall. Meganslaw. This was one of the home of Jarl Erik. He could trace his ancestry back to the founding fathers, and from there to the god Odin himself, his earth and the center of Kilsgard. Even though it was dark heart of night, Meganslaw was vibrating with activity. Drawing closer, Alva could hear her uncle's voice ringing across the room. She leant silently against the doorway, pressing her ear to the wood. The sounds from the insides were clear, and Alva immediately realized all the Carls were inside together. That was not good. It meant something that affected the whole town was unfolding in the dark of the night. I don't understand what you're telling me, Erik, Magnus bellowed. It's such a strange story. There are too many holes in it, and I'm in to investigate any further. I need all the information laid out before me. The Carls can take the benches, and I will hear from this strange myself about what has happened tonight. I know tongues he speaks. Alva could just make out the strange words in a foreign language, murmuring nervously beneath the noise of the hall. He babbles in a messy manner, one of the Carls answered. We can't understand him. He speaks the words of the men across the sea, explained Magnus. The English. On my travels, I learnt enough of the words that I can translate and tell you what he says. But you must sit silently, as he is frightened, and I must work hard to unravel his tale. Alva could hear benches scraping as men sat down to listen. She was going to hear a man speak a language of the English. Magnus spoke again. Bring the monk forward! A voice rose up. What is a monk? Magnus responded curtly. I said no interruption. You're in the presence of a monk. This man is here. Just look at his robe and hair. Alva cursed at the sign of the wooden door, obscuring her view of this fascinating man from overseas. Magnus continued. The English words, well, one God, not many. There's so many seers. They have priests who speak to the language and another group of holy men and women who lock themselves inside sacred buildings to say prayers all day. These are monks, and this is one of them. Now quiet, so we can hear him speak. A different voice began, quietly and anxiously, to talk in a version of Alva's own tongue, which sounded like it, and gone loose at the edges. She listened intently. The language was like Norse. They spoke, but the words were longer and rounder and softer. As the monk spoke, Magnus relayed his phrases back to the hall. The stranger says his name is Edmund, of the monastery of Lindisfarne in the kingdom of Northumbria, along the coast of the Northern Sea. He has been a monk at that place since he was a young boy of 8 winters, which means he had passed 15 years inside its walls. Alva knew tales of the island of Lindisfarne. She had heard them from her father and her uncle. A shiver ran down her spine at the mention of it. One of the Carls yelled out from the benches, Lindisfarne, that useless little island on the north coast of English. I remember our trip well. The promise of great wealth was hardly fulfilled, and the simpering weak men there would not lift an arm in defense of the lands. He is one of them. Weaklings are enemies. Why should we listen to him? Magnus replied furiously, why do you Norsemen know nothing about the sounds of your own voices. Listen, he has come to us from our mountain, and his story is bound with our town. We should hear more." Speaking again to the monk, he continued translating. He says, "He has traveled a long, hard journey to Kilsgard in search of a treasure beyond compare. He and his companions, an English warrior named Wiglaf of Bamberg, have followed clues etching on a mysterious bone casket, which they found while traveling abroad." Crouched by Alva's feet, Fenrir gave a loud snuffle. She hushed him gently and continued to press his ear to the cold wood, straining to hear more about this enigmatic box. The monk says this casket was covered in symbols, which he and his companions struggled to decode, and that the individual they had collected it from was a drunkard from our lands. This man of Kilsgard had a loose tongue and told him that the runes would lead to Linsfarn's lost treasures. It brought them here, and they could go no further, since they could not get the final clues from the casket. "This is crazy," another carl shouted suddenly. "A mystery casket found abroad, yet speaking of treasures here. We know what treasures they are in Kilsgard, since we brought most of them here to the Jarl's hall after we went a Viking. This is all nonsense. Who is this drunkard from our land? And why would the monk and his companion travel all this way because of some runes?" "Don't know all the answers," Olaf, Magnus replied, sounding frustrated. Alva steeled herself. She had learnt never to question Magnus part way through his investigations. "If you keep interrupting me, we will never get to the heart of the mystery." He turned again to the monk and continued with his broken narrative. He says he and his companion Wiglaf set up camp in a clearing on Giant's Finger, but were attacked in the night while sleeping. The monk watched a figure in a cloak strike his friend over the head, drag him to a horse, and then ride away. Terrified and alone, he had come to the home of his enemy in the hope of saving his friend. "The monk speaks of all this sincerely," Magnus said. Alva shuddered as the twin voices of her uncle and the monk died down. This tale was fascinating. A secret casket covered with codes that needs deciphering. Travelers across the seas searching for hidden treasure. A lone figure attacking men on a mountain and dragging them away. It was the stuff of Alva's dreams, and yet it was unfolding right now. Her body thrummed with excitement and fear. Another voice spoke up. "But why should we waste our time on this English monk?" Magnus spoke with anger. "Can't you see the importance of this? A man is missing on our mountain. He was attacked and dragged away. This means there is a kidnapper or potentially a murderer roaming the outskirts of Kilsgard. We have to protect the people, and to do that, we have to unpick the strands of this story." "Ha ha," thought Alva. "I'm just the person to unravel this mystery. Magnus will definitely need my help tonight." Magnus continued speaking behind the wall of the oak. "Jarl Eric, we must treat the monk as a guest of this hall. His people have been attacked by our people, and it took courage to come here in the dead of night. We should set up safe quarters for him outside, since we would not want to sleep inside the hall with the men." Alva heard the familiar and warm tones of Jarl Eric. "Magnus, you are the best at leading such investigations. You shall take 2 of my carls with you to the place the monk said he was attacked, and then you must test the truth of his words." A slight grumble murmured through the hall, and Alva knew the men would not be pleased that Magnus was yet again being showed special favor by the Jarl. The conversation shifted to discussing where the man would sleep, who should support his claim for hostage rights, and who should travel with Magnus. Stepping away from the doorway, Alva rapidly turned over the monk's story in her mind. She knew she could creep back to bed. Her mother was so tired because Ivan had a touch of elf shot and had been screaming in pain for the last few nights. She should do the right thing and be ready to help at daybreak. But then Alva saw the monk traveling cloak lying by the entrance, and the decision crystallized in her mind. The mystery was too much temptation for her. She was going to help her uncle unravel the monk's story, and Magnus was taking too long discussing all the details and worrying over the visitor. She had to move, as the clues could be lost if they delayed. Hadn't he told that himself? Grasping the monk's cloak, she rubbed the scent under Fenrir's muzzle. "Follow," she said, and the silver wolf set off at once, leading her deep into the forest. The main gates of the town were unguarded because the carls had rushed to the halls where the stranger arrived. There was a long pathway which ran along the river, branched off after a few hundred paces, with one leading out to the north and the second winding uptown, Giant's Finger. So we know what Giant's Finger is now. It's a place in town. The mountain looked silent and the brooding in the moonlight. It had many moods, and Alva knew then she'd spent more time exploring its rocks and crevices and was normal for a girl of her age. In her 12 winters, they'd drawn back to the mountain time and again searched for evidence of the tales her people told. When giants and dwarves carved out the landscape, she wanted to believe these myths, but her keen found no sign of the 10,000s of bodies that were supposed to lie at the root of the mountain. Alva believed what her eyes saw over what her ears heard. Recently, she had been drawn to the mountain for another reason, for the connection it had with her father. They had walked here together before he left, and here she would feel a little closer to him. She could also escape the tense atmosphere of the family home. Alva carried on running up the step slopes of Giant's Finger as the main route twisted away from the high decline. Her mind wasn't on where she was going after all. She had climbed those paths hundreds of times before. Instead, she thought about her uncle and the tensions that had been increasing within their once close little family. When her father was in Kilsgard, everyone was happy. He would take her on adventures. Magnus would occupy her with stories from his travels and insights into many mysteries he'd solved. Her mother would gently chide both of them for the way they had treated Alva like their equal. But once the father had left, the mood was very different. Why was there so much quiet hostility in her home? Blindly, she raced forward through the darkness as Fen sounded confidently ahead of her. Their passage became more treacherous. The rocks under her feet were slippery, and Fen was guiding her towards a ravine, where the river raged beneath the sheer drop. Alva's heart sank, and realization dawned. This was where she had been in her dream. Was it a prophecy? What does the word prophecy mean? If you have a dictionary, I'd like you to write it down because it's a fantastic word, and I'd like you to write it down. Had she seen her own death? Her mind told her to stop and turn back, but her heart and her feet were dragged along by the silver outline of Fenrir ahead. Alva began to run faster, trying to get past the point where she had fallen in her dream, and onto safety higher up. But as if the gods were pulling her by her strings, laughing at her, she felt she anticipated root catch on her shoe. Lost her footing and hurtled forward towards the edge of the ravine. She knew what was coming. She had seen it already. She was falling. She would become water and wind, and the river yawned up at her. But as quickly as she had been falling, Alva felt her body jerk in a sharp tug against her back. The black roots and the raging waters still seemed to reach up, yet they were not getting any closer. She heard a muffled noise behind her. Turning slowly, she saw Fenrir, his sharp fangs glinting in the light of the moon. He had her cloak beneath his teeth and his paws rooted to the ground. Half Alva's body was hanging free over the edge of the cliff, but Fenrir dug his claws into the earth, growling as he slowly paced backwards, dragging her towards the safety of the solid ground. She used her hands to scramble back over the edge, and her two collapsed, wheezing exhausted. Fenrir had saved her. Alva gasped, pulling the wolf over to her by the scruff of his neck and burying her face into his soft, thick fur. You're always one step ahead, my silver savior. Fenrir turned two watery dark eyes upwards, nudging his muzzle against her cheek. She and Fen had beaten the fates. Death would not take her today. She took a moment to catch her breath, and as her chest was aching and she could taste fear in her mouth, clambering back to her feet, she urged Fenrir on. Come on, boy, you've got the monk's scent. We need to get there before the others. He turned in an instant, became a flash of light between the trees ahead. Her canine guardian knew the way, and now Alva must follow. So, we will be on chapter 2. I will be reading that for you tomorrow. So, any words that you didn't understand, please write them down and put them up on Tapestry or even on Teams, and I will be able to help you with them.